Welcome to Closer to Venus. I'm Johnny Burke, and today's guest is Ronnie Ann Ryan. She is a certified coach, past life reader, and an intuitive healer who's known for helping clients move past blocks, love themselves, and attract love with a quality man. Today, we'll be talking about channeling your spirit guides, accessing the Akashic Records, and using her intuition to get answers from the highest sources available. Ronnie, welcome to the program.
Thank you so much, John. I'm really happy to be here.
Excellent. So, attract love with a quality man. I imagine that's got to be quite a popular topic with some people out there, with the women, of course. How does that tie into how you got started doing past life work?
The past life work came first.
Okay.
Then I got to an age where I was like, oh my gosh, how could I still be single? I had already been a student of a lot of spiritual, metaphysical stuff and personal growth. And so I put together a little program for myself because there was nothing 20 years ago.
That's true.
In fact, coaching was just a baby 20 years ago. So that's the program I still use today. And it worked for me and it's worked for my clients. And then what happened was, as I progressed through all the coaching materials, I started to see that sometimes there were problems that weren't addressed by the coaching and the mindset. And I thought, maybe we need to look a little deeper. That's where the two came together, because sometimes there are reasons that we're not conscious of that really aren't about this life. Talk to a regular therapist, they'll say everything has to do with this life. For the most part, that's probably true. But it's really good to just look beyond and see if there are influencers from the past. Maybe somebody made a vow to themselves about how they want to live in future lives, or they had experiences that created feelings where they don't really want to be in a relationship. So here they are now in this life, and they really want to be in a relationship, and they have a huge internal conflict that they're not conscious of. So that's what we go to look for.
When you mentioned vow, that seems to bring up the subject of a soul agreement, where someone says in that in-between space, this is what I need to experience in the next incarnation because these are things I have to work on. Is that related or?
Yes, absolutely. That's related. But what I found is, let's say a woman wants to be very independent. I have worked with some men too, but she really wanted to get married and have children. So that would actually describe myself. I don't know why, but I didn't think to do this for myself. But anyway, I've done it for other women. And so taking this independence thing, I found a lot of different things. Like one woman had broke off an engagement in this life to a man that she was in his harem. And she was really angry that she was just pushed off into the harem, which is just a bunch of women who hang around the palace or whatever and have to be ready for when the big guy, whoever he is, wants access to them. So it was a life that she was really angry about, and she never wanted to be controlled by a man again. But here she is in this life, 50, still single, and she had never heard about this. She had never considered this. She didn't know about this past life. So it was really helpful to gain that understanding of why she had been so strong in her independence and why there was a conflict. And why that changes is by the time being 50, she's had a lot of years of being independent. So she came, she learned what she needed to learn. And what I said to her was she could probably find a relationship where she could maintain a lot of independence and still be in a relationship, not breaking the vow, which would be very different at 20 than at 50.
Breaking the vow brings up a lot of different consequences, or should I say scenarios. Oddly enough, I just had a guest speaker come on recently, and she talked about how we have pathways that are predetermined, and no matter what action we take, some of those pathways are unavoidable. So this all kind of ties into that, like you just said, the vow, the contract, an agreement that you make with your soul group. Talking with intuitives, I've noticed that many of them had mystical type experiences when they're younger, such as seeing spirit, being exposed to what many people would think of as ghosts. Did you have any of that when you were a kid?
You know, I did not.
Okay.
I started studying in my 20s, and I studied and practiced and tried for a long time before I could break through with my intuition. I did have a skill, though, this is kind of silly, of looking at yearbooks. So by the time I got out of high school and I was in college, I'd see other people's high school yearbooks, and I could look at pictures and tell them about the people without knowing them, just from looking at their picture. And I never really thought about why I could do that or what that was about. But that was my intuition. But I had to study a long time and practice. I think it's because I had vows. I had vows about magic and some other things. So I had a lot of work to push through. I probably went off the rails a couple times, in the learning process of life. But I also will tell you that I did have quite a mystical experience the first time I sat down to meditate. What happened was, it was 12 o'clock on a Sunday night. That was dumb enough. But I just closed my eyes because I had been to a psychic fair, and the psychic said, you need to learn how to meditate. So I closed my eyes and I just tried to be calm and empty my mind. And this incredible, intense force of energy came at me. It came down through my head, pushed heavily into my body. And my eyes were closed and I didn't open them. I don't know why. I was so scared. The force of it, and everything was purple, purple, purple. It was just, I was like being accosted by purple energy somehow. And my heart was racing and pounding, and I was like, what the heck is happening to me? And I thought, you need to just breathe, just breathe. And so about probably 15 minutes later, I finally opened my eyes and ran to call a friend and woke her up. But it took me years to find out that was my crown chakra opening. And I didn't know what that was. And so many people were afraid when I told them about that. It was the strangest thing. I called the psychic the next day who had told me to meditate. And she said, well, it wasn't dark purple, was it? Dark purple is evil, but lavender is okay. But so it took me a long time to find out what that was. But that was the dark ages compared to today.
So that meditation, that experience, would you consider that a breakthrough moment that opened up many vistas, whether it be their Akashic Records or the past lives or basically all of the above?
I think it was a reclaiming of an opening from so many lives where I have done this kind of work, but I still had a lot of work to do before I started channeling. What happened was I took Reiki 1, like I'm a Reiki master now, although I don't teach or work on clients really, although I do use my Reiki, but in a more subtle way. After the first 21-day activation period, that's when I started to channel. So that really helped me open up to the next level. And what's really funny is I've taught a lot of tapping into your intuition classes and stuff like that. I taught them in the 90s, and people caught on right away. So it was just my own block. It doesn't have to be that hard at all. I think today people catch on like lightning,
It does seem like this type of phenomena is more commonplace. You mentioned that we weren't really having too many discussions like this 20 years ago, and even coaching was a baby. Was this a precursor to your involvement with the Akashic Records, or did that and your recognition of past lives kind of happen all at once?
I think it was the activation for my intuition. Shortly after that experience, I did start taking a class I took that was a full year, where we practiced with the same group of women every week. We just called it past lives. We didn't call it the Akashic Records at the time. So yes, I think that certainly helped me open up to all that happened afterwards. Yes.
Okay. Looking at yearbook pictures and getting some kind of recognition of those faces, is that pretty much the same thing as looking at someone in our current life and thinking, why do I get the feeling I know this person? Is it a similar sensation?
I don't think it is. I think that was my intuition, and what you're talking about is deja vu more. That soul recognition, I don't think I knew those people. I think I could just pick up on them intuitively. You know how Native Americans never had wanted their picture taken because they said it captured the soul? I think it does capture a piece of the soul, because when I worked at psychic fairs in the 90s, people brought me a picture. I could tell them about the person. Now, over time, I didn't need the picture, but initially that helped.
Now, since we're on the subject, have you come across people that have given you the sense that you may have known them before?
Oh, for sure.
Really?
I remember being in 9th grade and spotting this girl across a parking lot at an event. And how can you spot a girl across a parking lot? And I was like, who is that? I need to know who that is. Somehow I figured it out, and we were super tight friends for many years. So that's a big time recognition. I also think I knew my husband before. I know I knew my husband because the first night we spent together, I dreamt about a previous incarnation together. So
Really?
there have been many instances in my life where I've recognized people where you just look at them and you know there's something here, you know?
Yep.
It's been friends, girlfriends.
That's not really surprising because in this forum, most of the intuitives are women. Not that that's really shocking, duh, because of the intuition and how many people talk about we as a culture, as a civilization, are moving away from the masculine and towards the feminine energy. That's probably a discussion for another day, but it's got a lot to do with that. Let's talk about the records and how that's different from a past life regression therapy session and how you got involved and what your path was.
Okay. I first encountered the Akashic Records through reading Edgar Cayce books at the beginning of my spiritual journey, where I was reading everything in sight, and I still am, of course, reading a lot. It just became really popular within the last 15 years or so. So when I first started doing past life work, we didn't talk about the Akashic Records. I didn't know what that was, and I wasn't worried about it because, it didn't matter. So today, everything's about the Akashic Records. So I learned about what they are, and I did some research, and I found out that the Akasha is the Sanskrit word for boundless space. You can think of it as a supercomputer for all of the data of your past lives and everyone else's, or like a giant library where everybody has their own book of all their lives. So it's like a resource. It's your personal life history, multiple life history or whatever. So that's how the Akashic Records are. And I find there's a lot of structure and rules about accessing the Akashic Records, which are actually talked about, I think, in both Buddhism and Hinduism. But reincarnation is something that's in the Kabbalah, it's in the Muslim world, and in Christianity, in the first Bible, they talk about the Book of Life. And so that's another way of looking at the Akashic Records, the Book of Life.
The Book of Life is mentioned in certain religious documents. Of course, if you go to your pastor or your imam, he's probably not likely to strike up a conversation about the Akashic Records. It's been explained to me several times that the book, the Akasha, the Akashic Records, has a record of the past, the present, and the future, which apparently seem to be happening all at once. Your thoughts?
Mind-boggling.
It is. It's very hard to get your head around, isn't it? Almost like you're shifting an axis from the horizontal to the vertical. Do you have any insight into how that works and how we can possibly have a record of our future?
I'm going to say that there's a lot of opinions about this. I have no proof. I can only give you my opinion. The way for me that I view it is, it talks about my future potential. I do understand this quantum idea that there is no time and it's all happening now. But I think that what also happens is when you change something today, you change it in the past and the future too. Or you can change the past and that'll change today and the future. So sometimes I just don't think about things that get me too confused.
Probably very good advice because that can be, as you say, mind-boggling.
I will tell you that I don't do predictive readings, like a fortune telling kind of, here's what's going to happen to you. I can tell you what your best avenue is, where the most energy is, what's for your highest good. But I don't do that kind of predictive work, especially out of the Akashic Records. Other people do, and that's fine. I'm not saying you shouldn't. It's just not what I do. I'm very focused on the here and now and what will help you move forward in a practical way today.
Now, speaking of the records, who are the records keepers? And have you had any contact with them or have you witnessed it? Is it like viewing a live space or is it like watching a recording?
I can tell you that there are as many different ways to experience this as there are human beings. In order to see if I was missing anything, I took a bunch of classes. So I took a class with Terry Uktana. She has a very unique way of looking at it. And first she wants you to connect with an animal, and then she wants you to see the library, and then she wants you to walk in and talk to your record keeper. Other people talk about the Lords of Light and the Lords of the Records, and they make it very religious. And you have to say amen 3 times and whatever. So I tried these different methods to see, what's it like to use their method versus mine. I have seen, I don't know what, an angel or a spirit of some kind of upper level spirit who is female and very graceful, welcoming. When I go picture myself going into the records, sometimes I picture myself walking into the library, particularly when I'm trying to do my own thing. When I work with other people, I might not bother with that. But when I go to see my own records, I'm looking for my helper. So I see her and she's very graceful and she sweeps her hand wide in a welcoming motion. Welcome, come in. She gives me a little bow. I bow to her. So it's very respectful, but very light. And then shows me the pathway and I walk in to go do whatever I have to do. I've never actually read my book. Terry Uktana talks about reading the actual records in a book. That blows me away. That's not what happens for me. Sometimes I see the visual and I have a little movie and it's that clear. Sometimes I just get a visual impression. Sometimes I just have a knowing and I just get the information. I don't have one way that the information comes to me. Sometimes I get a feeling. Sometimes I just get like a download, a big chunk of information. So it really varies for me. But a lot of people have a specific thing that happens to them every time.
So there's many ways to get the information. So what does karma, which I think for many people, it's frequently misunderstood. What does karma have to do with the Akashic Records?
I'm not a Buddhist or Hindu person, so they might have a different perspective on this. But the way I look at karma is often it's mistaken because people say, oh, karma's a bitch. It's not a punishment. Karma's really not a punishment. The point of karma is that your soul is here to learn lessons. So your karma is what you are working on. So it's not like if you killed somebody in a last life, then they're going to come and kill you in this life. That may happen, but it's not a tit for tat kind of, you do this to me, eye for eye kind of thing. That's not how it works. It's really about you learning whatever lessons you set out to learn to raise your vibration so that eventually you can get back to source. That's the whole point.
Yeah, it's a great explanation. I recently had someone tell me that when we had this type of discussion that there is no good, there is no bad. There's just experience that we need to, as you just said, raise our vibe so we can get back to source so we don't have to keep coming back here or to whatever planet or star system to learn the lessons, I guess. Have you ever had a past life regression yourself?
I have done that, yes.
Okay. How is that different from your other work, such as an Akashic Records reading?
It was a little more thorough. We saw more of the life in succession, where we came in at a point that mattered to me now, and we progressed until we saw my death. I didn't see my birth or my family per se, but I did see all the way to my death. When I do a reading, I only go for the information that's helpful to you now. So your death might not be relevant to what you're having a struggle with currently. So I don't go from beginning to end when I do the Akashic Record thing. I'm just going for what is the root cause? And I heard this recently and I love this phrase. Past life trauma is present life
drama.
Which I had never heard before, but I love that. So yeah, the regression was different. I saw all the way to where I got my head chopped off.
Oof, ouch. I'm curious. Maybe it's a morbid curiosity, but do you remember what century it was? Or?
Yeah. So it was the 1500s in Italy. It was a beautiful life. My brother was my husband. And we were with a bunch of magical couples. We were doing magic in a big room. We were standing in a circle and someone tattled on us. Magic was not allowed. And so the Garda came and, I don't know if you know about the Renaissance outfits, but the man had those big, like short bloomer pants and a lot of colors and metal helmets. And they came with like poles with some kind of knife at the end or whatever. And they just came in and went whoop and cut everybody's head off. So, and the message I got was really funny because it was immediate, which was that's what happens when you play with power. But honestly, for me, I didn't have horrible, big, traumatic reaction to reliving that because I just went right to the lesson. I didn't have to work through that and get rid of it and clear. The woman I was working with is also a healer, so she probably helped me do some of that clearing. But I didn't have any lasting discomfort from going through that memory. But it was a little surprising.
I would say so. And you did mention before that in your present life, you had a fear of magic. Good reason for that, right?
Yeah.
Well, since we're on the subject of past lives and past life regression and so on, that often leads to discussions about in between incarnations and vows and agreements and things. We've often heard, well, you can't choose your parents, but actually the truth seems to be that we do choose our parents and maybe even our romantic partners. What are your thoughts?
All right. There's a guy named Michael Newton. He wrote Destiny of Souls and Journey of Souls. And these books are fabulous. I love them. He did hypnosis on his patients. And instead of focusing on past lives, he focused on lives between lives and learned tremendous amount about what's going on in between our incarnations. And what he discovered was that there are soul pods, PODS pods, which are like families and they're large and you belong to a pod and you incarnate with people from your pod, which I don't think means you can't interact with other people from other pods. So likely you're recycling the people that you are with. Like my brother was my husband, or you interchange genders and roles. Sometimes people find out their mother was their child. So I think that you do choose your parents. I think you do choose a lot of the things. I don't know if you choose every single thing, but probably you choose the biggest things that will help you learn your lessons and move your karma forward because that's why you come to be.
Have you seen examples either in your own life, or should I say lives, or perhaps in your work with your clients where they discover, I actually did choose this, or I did choose this person?
I can tell you from my own life that I definitely chose my parents because they created an amazingly safe home life and environment. Very supportive. I'm extremely lucky because of what I'm here to learn and do, and they supported that the best. So I have no doubt that I chose them, and I am shocked at how much I have encountered them since they've passed.
Really?
It blows me away because I've seen them, I've dreamt about them, and when I've worked with other people who were doing mediumship, they always show up. They always show up. So they're still hanging around and watching over me, I guess, which offers a lot of comfort. So I definitely knew my husband before, so I feel like it took me a long time to find him, but there's no question that we knew each other before. Did I answer your question?
Yeah, you did. I think it's a pretty big ask to try to find an example where someone actually remembers the actual agreement being made. I think we're actually not supposed to remember that. That's the best it's been explained to me. It's a knowing, as you mentioned before. It's just a knowing that I'm pretty sure I made an agreement with this person or this group of people.
You know what I have found is helpful is when it comes to forgiveness. This is one of the ways that working with your past lives can be the most helpful thing. Because if you can gain perspective on what's happening in your life and why it's happening and why you experience something, then you don't have to stay angry or you don't have to feel like a victim because you can see from a much higher level that you were doing some learning. The very first past life I ever saw was when I was murdered. Somebody attacked me from the front with a knife. I was a Sioux warrior and I was attacked by another Sioux warrior inside the teepee, and there was a woman there and they wanted to be together and I was in the way, so he killed me. And I recognized them in a flash. There was no question in my mind who they were from this life.
Wow.
Because when I was in 9th grade, I was in a horrible little love triangle. My best friend and I were the warriors, and we both liked the same guy, and he picked her. And so they went together again. And I was devastated. I was hurt. I was depressed for most of my freshman year. And when I saw that life, I had a much deeper understanding. And I thought, considering I got murdered last time, like this time was not so bad, right?
Not at all. I can't help but wonder, once you have that recognition of knowing someone from a past life, have you ever actually let these people know, or is that a little bit too dangerous?
You know, what's really funny? I actually have tried to find her. I didn't try that hard, but I looked on Facebook and LinkedIn or whatever, and I can't find her. Sometimes you want to let sleeping dogs lie.
Maybe so.
I'm kind of a fatalist like that. Like, I look for the door to be open, and if there's no opening,
It's probably not open for a reason. Tell us about some of your favorite readings.
my favorite reading. I did one recently. It was so surprising. This is a perfect example of how when you start doing this kind of work, you just have to trust what you get and say it in a gentle way. So it was a woman. I think she had an Indian background, and I could see her on Zoom, so I could see what she looked like. And she wanted to know about her past lives. And the first life I saw for her, she was a man who was with another man. It was a father. I don't know about his relationship to her in this life, but they were together and they trained tigers at the palace, whatever palace it was in India. And that's what they did. They were animal trainers and they were tiger whisperers or whatever. And they worked with the tigers. And it was in 15 or 1600s. I never saw a tiger trainer before. And I was so shocked. This is one of the hardest things about doing this work. You got to say it. So I did tell her that, and she had no expression. And we did an hour together. And at the end, she goes, you know, that thing about the tigers was really amazing, because anytime anybody ever asks me, what's your favorite animal? I always say tiger.
Really?
So that was great confirmation in my mind. I had another woman come to me when I was working at Psychic Fears years ago. She wanted to know about her past lives just in general. And I said, you know, this is crazy, but I see you as like the Pied Piper with a bunch of rats behind you. And you're playing this little flute thing and all the rats are following you out. Is that what St. Patrick's did in Ireland? And he got rid of all the rats. So she was hysterical laughing. And she goes, I work in a biology lab. It was a biology lab with rats, and they call me the rat lady. We were both laughing. Another one that really was amazing was a young Japanese woman came to me, and she wanted to know about her most recent or her previous reincarnation, the one closest to this life, right before this one. She didn't say anything else. And so I saw her as an American sailor at Pearl Harbor who lost his life when the Japanese came and bombed. She was a little surprised, and she said, you know, I'm so afraid of drowning. Why is that? And I said, well, you drowned in Pearl Harbor. And she goes, I'm so afraid of fireworks and loud, booming noises. And I'm like, well, you died in Pearl Harbor. I was so amazed and impressed by her spirit that as an American sailor in one life, came back as a Japanese woman to learn about that culture and understand who they are and what happened. It's a perfect example of karma, right?
Right. And it does indicate pre-birth planning as well. Seems to be almost unavoidable. What can you tell someone who is very skeptical? What can you really tell them that could possibly dispel their skepticism?
Okay, so there's a book by a guy named Bob Snow, who is a detective, and I'm not sure if I'm going to get the title right, but it's something of a past life.
Portrait of a Past Life Skeptic, and I believe the first title is Looking for Carol Beckwith. The reason I know that is because I interviewed him about a week ago. But yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, it's very interesting. I think that's a good example because he was a hard-boiled skeptic. Really was. I don't want to go too far deep into that, but I'll put a link in the show notes to his episode in case anybody wants to look that up. It's a good one. It's a good example.
So I'll just tell you super brief. He had some memories and he investigated his own past life and found truth to his memories. I can't convince anybody. I can't prove anything to anybody. Everybody's got their own path and their way of seeing. But if you are remotely curious, that book might help you start to believe. But there's so many books by doctors, like, what's that guy, Brian Weiss or Roger Wolger. These classic books, they're old now, but they're still filled with all of the hypnosis that they did. And the first book I ever read was In Search of Bridey Murphy, and that was from the 50s. It was already an old book when I read it, and that was all about a woman who was being hypnotized, and she slipped back into being Bridey Murphy. And the therapist was like, whoa, where did you go? They had never encountered that before, so.
Yes, there's quite a few of those books, especially the ones on near-death experiences that are written by doctors like Eben Alexander. And another one that was interesting was Dying to Wake Up by Rajiv Party, who was also a neurosurgeon that apparently was an atheist, had no spiritual beliefs at all.
I just want to give you one weirdo example of how there's consciousness in places we don't expect. I know a woman who, unfortunately, her daughter died at 32. She got hit by a car and she donated her organs. So the heart got placed with a man who really needed a heart transplant. Suddenly, after he was better and his body accepted the heart and everything, he started eating a lot of chocolate and doing yoga and things that he had never done before. He was connecting with the spirit of this woman whose heart he got, and the mother told the stories about, and they met. It was just outrageous. And that has nothing to do with past lives, but her soul lives on. A piece of the energy or whatever is influencing him. I don't know how that works, but that flipped me out to hear that story.
It is. And actually, I think it is related because one concept that ties a lot of this together is the survival of consciousness, whether it's a past life recognition or it's a near-death experience. The theory is the consciousness does survive the death of the brain. Do you think that the work with past lives, do we think in our lifetime that we'll ever see that work come more in the mainstream?
That's such a good question. Really hard to say. I think the medical profession is always at risk for dabbling in these things that can't be proven. They don't like to take risks because they have to be insured and they're licensed. But let's just say that you don't need to go to a doctor to work with these things, have healing, and there are therapists who do these things and hypnotherapists who are trained and people like me who offer compassionate information and insights. Where people are ready and they're open to that, they come to us and we can share that information. So I think it is a lot more prevalent than it has been in a while.
If you Google past life regression or even life between lives therapy, you can find therapists locally, which I think is pretty encouraging. Speaking of insight, I believe you have a gift for our listeners.
Oh, I do. Thanks for bringing that up. So I have a book titled 7 Ways Your Past Lives Affect Your Love Life Now. It's a short book, and it's all about how you might see patterns in your life today that relate to the past. And you can find that at the number 7 pastlives.com.
Excellent. I will definitely put that note in the show notes as well. Ronnie, thanks so much for joining us today. Very, very cool information. How can our listeners learn more about you online?
They could find me at nevertoolate.biz, and I'm also the host of the Breathe Love and Magic podcast, and I have a past life travelogue radio show on 360 Talk Radio for Women.
Okay, we will put that in the show notes and the transcript as well. You've been listening to Closer to Venus. I'm Johnny Burke. If you enjoyed today's episode, please consider subscribing. You can also leave us a review on iTunes as well. For more info, please go to closertovenus.com. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.